Why don't I prepare for these things ahead of time? Hi folks, it's Darcy from the Purposeful Pantry. Welcome to my channel. Today it's going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge of dehydrating questions and answers that I get asked a lot, some announcements, and some announcements. That's it. Just to let you know, there are going to be timestamps at the bottom of this video that you can kind of go through where you want to look to see what information is it that you're looking for. But I hope you'll stick around for the whole video because there's just so much good stuff. Okay, first one is actually not a question, but it's a tip. It's a tip I wish I would just remind myself of every time and that you need to know as well. Label your jars. Okay, when you're done dehydrating, you know that project you just finished, you put it up on the shelf, it's so pretty, you want to use all the things that you have here, you want to use them all. But if you don't label it, 2 weeks from now, you won't remember what's in this jar. And you'll think you remember, and then you open it and go to use it, and it's not what you thought it was at all. When I first opened this jar, I thought it was a leftovers of some tomato paste that I had done, that I had kept separate, that it was to be used first before I got into my regular jar. And I narrowly escaped putting a ton of red pepper powder into there. So this is kind of like a version of paprika. It's not really paprika, but you could kind of use it inside of a dish that way for a little spice that's different, but it's basically bell pepper powder. And I didn't label this jar, and I almost ruined a dish this weekend because I didn't do it. So label your jars. Even I don't always get it done because I think I know it, and I don't. I always forget. I forget like the next day. I forget. Okay, the next question. Can you add food to a jar that you've already started? And yes, you can. So if you're drying, like right now I'm in the process of drying a ton of greens. So it's just going to be an ongoing process that I'm constantly creating more greens to put into my jar. So I can't do it all at once and then add it all at once. Even running 2 or 3 dehydrators at one time, I go through a lot of green powder. So I just do a lot of it at once. So I can dry it, I can powder it, and I can add more to a jar as I go. But even if I don't do another load for another month, I can still add to that jar. It's fine. I generally give myself about 6 months out. That after about 6 months, I go ahead and start a new jar and use up the old one as I'm moving through it, because I don't want to add stuff that has, especially with powders, because you've got a shelf life of about 6 to 9 months of powders. I mean, that's the going time. You might get some longer time out of that depending on the powder, but you know that you can't store it forever because you've already broken it down so much. It's been exposed to all the air, all the light, all the moisture that you can, amongst a bunch of tiny particles versus the whole. So I give myself about 6 months, and then I go ahead and start a new jar and use up the old one. Just make sure that everything is properly dried. You've conditioned it. It's perfectly dry before you add it to the next batch, and that way you don't run the risk of contaminating one with another with something that might not be dry enough. Okay, but yes, add to your jars as you go. Okay, the next question is, can you use an air fryer to dehydrate? We get asked this a lot in our dehydrating group on Facebook. It's Dehydrating Tips and Tricks. There's a link down in the description box below. And those of you on mobile are going to have to open the little V that gets you to open the description box, okay? People want to be able to dehydrate, but they don't know if they want to invest in an air fryer or if they want to go ahead and invest in a dehydrator, and they're told by all the air fryer manufacturers that you can dehydrate in them, but that's not true. It's not good dehydrating you can't do in all air fryers. What you want is an air fryer that can get down to a low enough temperature that you're not losing all of your nutrients by actually cooking it instead of really dehydrating it. Plus, you want one that actually can move the air out as opposed to just circulating the air inside, because you need to get that moisture out of the machine, not just kind of recirculate it, because then you're not really drying it. You're going to end up cooking it more than anything. Now, there are some air fryers on the market that will work. The problem is that air fryers have very small area where you can actually dry. There's not, you can't put a lot in it. And even if you have one that has a couple of layers, you're really doing a snack version of dehydrating more than you're doing a stocking version of dehydrating. So if you're interested in doing this, where you have dehydrated foods on the shelf all the time that you can actually use, you need to invest in a regular dehydrator because it's just going to work better for you in the long run. Now, if you're really only interested in doing apple slices sometimes, and maybe just throwing something in there for quick snacks, like you're going to cut up a zucchini to have for chips. An air fryer may work for you, but remember, the temperatures need to go down below 150, and it needs to be able to circulate the moisture out of the dehydrator, out of the air fryer, not just within it. So you need that convection oven kind of movement out. And I know they are basically just like mini convection ovens, but that fan moving stuff out of it is really important. All right, another question that's often asked and is confusing for a lot of people is, do you lose nutrients when you dehydrate? It depends. The caveat is, if you're so concerned about nutrients when you're preserving food, then you need to stay with raw food and just eat fresh, okay? Because every preserving method is going to lose a little bit. Excuse me. And if not in the beginning, at the end when you cook it, you're still going to lose nutrients at the end when you cook food at the temperatures they're supposed to be cooked at. When you're dehydrating, you're going to lose a little vitamin A and vitamin C, especially the further up the temperature scale you go. So if you keep your foods down under 110 and under, okay, I know I'm going up on this, but if you keep your foods in this range, and this is a handy little magnet, and I have a sticker version of this as well that's available in my store, link down below, link on the iCards above, that if you keep it down below 110, then you don't have to worry about losing nutrients. You're keeping it within that raw food stage where basically you're just drying the food. There's not much heat applied to it, so you're not losing very much. But the further up that scale you go, the more of the heat sensitive foods that you're going to affect how much they keep. So you're going to lose a little vitamin A, you're going to lose some vitamin C, you're going to lose a few B vitamins the further up the scale you go as well. But for the most part, you're keeping most of the vitamins and nutrients when you're dehydrating. You're keeping all the fiber, you're keeping all the carbs. Unfortunately, all the carbs stay. Those don't go away at all. So you do have to watch that with if you're worried about carbs. But then when you go to cook it later, you're going to lose the typical nutrients you lose when you cook. So don't be so focused on the nutrients that you're keeping with dehydrating. Just make sure that you're not dehydrating things too hot. When you go up to that 160 range, if you're using a single temperature dehydrator, you're going to lose more nutrients up front than you will when you're low. So if you're talking about fruits that you're going to snack on a lot that you don't actually cook, you can dry them a little lower, and sorry, my light just keeps going on and off. You can dry a little lower to keep more of those nutrients if you're really concerned about keeping that vitamin C in your snacky fruits. But then you're going to take longer to dry, so just keep that in mind, okay? But yes, you keep most of the nutrients in dehydrated foods better than every other preservation method, save freeze drying. Freeze drying keeps most of the nutrients all the time because it doesn't use heat to create the heat to pull out the moisture to of your food. Another question related to that, does blanching remove all the nutrients? No, in fact, it doesn't. I get that comment a lot. Blanching does remove some nutrients, but if you blanch for a lot longer than it's expected to go, or if you don't use the ice method at the end of the blanching process where you dunk your food in ice water to stop the cooking process, then you're saving the best that you can. And in some cases, blanching actually changes the oxalic acids that are in the foods that will help, it stops those, and it allows you to absorb more of the nutrients from things like grains. So blanching is effective to stop the enzymatic process that makes food degrade on your shelf, so it's necessary. But if you blanch it for a long time, then yes, you're going to lose all the nutrients because you're basically just cooking it out. So blanch the times that are appropriate. I've got a chart down below in the description box where it takes you to where you can, a chart of the things that should be blanched and the times they should be blanched. Okay, so then the next question. Do I have to use a moisture absorber / vacuum sealer / oxygen absorber in any of my foods that I want to store on the shelf? No, you don't. Okay. Yes, I do use a vacuum sealer. When I'm putting something away for long term, like if I fill up, like if you can see right here, there's this large jar of black beans and then a large jar of corn. What I do is I have quite a few of these of things that I keep in my pantry, and they are vacuum sealed. When I'm going to fill up my daily use jar, which you'll see on some of these are more daily use that I use a lot. I will take the big jar, I will open it, fill up my small jar, then re-vacuum seal the large jar, or I'm vacuum sealing it. It's not re-vacuum seal. I'm just going to vacuum seal it and put it back in the shelf in storage. And then these jars are not vacuum sealed because I'm in and out of them all the time. Now, a moisture absorber will help those things that are particularly prone to absorbing and clumping, so I will use a moisture absorber in those things. So in many of these jars, it's also fruit powders in the back. I don't use those as much as I use cooking powders, but I will use a moisture absorber in those because in certain times of the year, it's very humid here, and opening the jar a lot will introduce moisture, and so that helps control it so you don't have clumping. But in many of my storage jars like this, the corn, the beans, and everything else that I do, I don't always use anything because it's not necessary. It's helpful, but it's not necessary. If you want to do long-term storage, you're going to use an oxygen absorber. I have so much trouble with that word. And those are the things that you're putting back that you don't plan on opening for a year or more. Those things could use an oxygen absorber to help maintain their quality for long term. But if you're going to be opening it again in the next 2 months, don't bother using it. It's a waste. Okay. All right. I hope that helps. You don't need them. They can be helpful, but they are so not necessary. So don't panic if you don't have them. Okay. The next question is, can I use plastic baggies to store? You can, but it's not recommended. It's for short term, yes, you can, like a project you're going to see probably in the next week or two. I actually stored some greens in a plastic bag overnight when I was processing through, and I didn't have time to finish it that night, so I was just going to do it the next day. I just put it in a plastic bag because it's going to be fine for overnight. It would be fine for maybe a couple of weeks. The problem is that plastic will allow air to move through it over time. It's not foolproof, and especially if you're using a zip top, that zip top will allow air to come through over time. You'll notice that if you've had stuff stored in the freezer, that even if you like do the suction method out of a plastic bag and you vacuum it around your foods, over time you'll start to see that it didn't keep that vacuum because it does allow air to move through it over time. So use it for a short-term quick thing. Don't use it for long-term. I wouldn't store fruit in it because just that reason, that it will allow the transfer of air and moisture through it. Now, if you're going to take it on camping or hiking or whatever, yes, use plastic bags. I mean, and then, take them home. Don't leave them. But you can also use silicone bags. I mean, you can use whatever you need to for a very short term. Just don't plan on storing long term in them at all. However, what I will do is I will store things within plastic bags that I don't have. I don't want to use up a whole jar for something small when I have a lot of small things. So I will store them in individual plastic bags, and then I would put them all in a larger jar. That way it keeps it airtight, but it also keeps it all separated, so I don't have to worry about it. The last question I have before we get to some announcements are, will I get botulism from dehydrating? No, this is not canning, and doesn't work like canning. Even if you're vacuum sealing, it doesn't work like that. There is a big rumor out there that you can't vacuum seal things because you're going to get botulism from a low oxygen environment, and it's wrong. When you dehydrate, you are dehydrating well under any kind of moisture that you have to worry about. And so that's why you go through conditioning. That's why you dry fully. That's why you don't store anything in that jar until you know it's dry. And you can vacuum seal to your heart's content. Okay. Don't worry about it. You're not going to get botulism from drying food, especially if you do it properly. If you do any food preservation method improperly, then there's a risk that you're going to get sick somehow, and that's because you didn't follow the rules. And trust the process. I'm sorry, I'm borrowing that from Lisa Sutton at Sutton's Days, as I kind of do sometimes, because she's a wise woman. Trust the process of how to dehydrate, and you're going to be fine. Okay, let's get to the announcements. I am running a 30% off sale in my store today for my ebooks, which is the Dehydrating Basics and the 30-Day Pantry Challenge. This is a challenge that walks you through 30 days of learning how to stock your pantry with foods that your family already eats. It's not about stocking foods that you have no idea how to use or foods that you cannot eat. So it's a step-by-step guide for 30 days to walk you through how to do it. And then there's the Dehydrating Basics, Tips, Tricks, and Facts about dehydrating. This is not a how to dehydrate specific foods. It is a question and answer book that I developed last year for Drycember, which I'm going to link to in the iCards above, that were 31 days of talking about dehydrating, of teaching you how to dehydrate, so that you understood the concept of it, so that you could take any food that you wanted and do it yourself. So this is basically the book version of that you just have it handy at your fingertips to find out any information that you want. Okay, it's just like this. Now, both of these are ebooks. They are not physical books. I just print mine out so I have them handy because I like physical books, and they are both on sale for 30% off with with the code thank you. The links will be down below, and I think I can do them in the iCards, and the web address is right here. Okay. Also, just in case you didn't know, I have this handy dehydrating tool for your dehydrator that is a list of basic foods and how to dehydrate them in categories. Okay, it's not like each individual food, but it's categories of foods, the temperatures that you need to use to hydrate it. It is in Fahrenheit and Celsius for everybody all over the world. I ship all over the world with these. And so these are also in the store now. They're available now. They are not on sale, unfortunately, because the price on them is low enough that I'm not doing much of a discount on that, but the books are. Okay, so the next thing is my book. Okay, the dehydrating book that I told you guys about a couple months ago is still coming. I'm about 60% done. I'm in the middle of the part that I'm most excited about because it's the thing that makes it different than every other dehydrating book on the market. It is coming. Unfortunately, the February date that I thought that I could get it out, which was 2/2/22, it was not accounting for the fact that I need to spend some time in an editing process with an editor, and then it has to be formatted for release. So I wasn't thinking far enough ahead about how that was going to work. So I'm going to have to push it back until probably mid-March, if not late March. But I'm going to need a couple extra weeks because you're going to want me to have a couple extra weeks. I really need an editor. No, that's it. So at the end of November, as we move into the Christmas season and all the other holidays that happen, I wish your family the best. I hope your Thanksgiving was wonderful for those of you who celebrate it, and I will see you again next time. Happy dehydrating.